Frank Capra was one of cinema's most outstanding directors. He put together such greats as Lady for a Day, Lost Horizon, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, It Happened One Night, and a string of other never-to-be-forgotten classics of the screen. He personally created or vastly improved half a dozen stars like Barbara Stanwyck, Clark Gable, Claudette Colbert, and Jean Arthur. Capra had his own very special type of humor, and it had an appeal with Americans and foreigners alike. He spoke the common language, laughter. Frank Capra came to the U.S. with his Sicilian parents at age 6. He and his brother Tony started out selling newspapers on street corners. Capra was bright in school and graduated at age 16. More than anything, he wanted an education. He wanted to go to college. He worked and saved enough money to enroll in California Institute of Technology, majoring in physics. He held down several jobs in order to stay in school and sent home money to the family as well. In 1921, in San Francisco, he started his film career with an ex-actor named Walter Montague. They produced a short one-reeler, and it was just enough to give Capra the film bug. By this time, he knew enough about picture making to get a job as a gag man for Hal Roach Studios. When he worked out several gags for Our Gang comedies, Capra asked Roach to let him try directing. Roach refused. Capra spent the next 2 years writing gags for the Mack Sennett comedies. He specialized in supplying gags for comedian Harry Langdon. Langdon went to the First National as feature comedian in 1926. He took his gag man with him as director. The picture that made Frank Capra tops in Hollywood was It Happened One Night with Claudette Colbert and Clark Gable in 1934. At that time, he was directing for Harry Cohen of Columbia Studios. In this film, he took the old classic four of show business, hero, heroine, villain, comedian, and cut it down to 3. He combined hero and comedian into one person. This formula helped make Capra films what they are. It Happened One Night grabbed all 5 major awards: Best Picture, Best Actress, Best Actor, Best Writer, and Best Director. It wasn't long before Capra was considered to have made Columbia. His pictures were all hits. In 1939, Capra directed his most controversial film, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, with Jimmy Stewart and Jean Arthur. Going for realism, the Senate chamber was replicated in Columbia Studios. The members and their mannerisms were copied as well. When Mr. Smith debuted in Washington, the gala performance turned into a grand fiasco for Capra. The residents of the Capitol took great offense at looking at themselves so accurately portrayed, and Frank Capra was nearly run out of town. It was 1942, Pearl Harbor, and the Second World War. Capra had an urge to join the Army, but before he did, he had to leave his family with something to live off of. It was time for Arsenic and Old Lace with Cary Grant. Capra knew that this could be filmed quickly and cheaply, so he set it up and did the shooting in 4 weeks. The plot to keep his family well off backfired, but the film didn't. In the Army, Frank Capra was assigned to the Signal Corps in charge of morale films. As such, he created the Why We Fight series to help give the war a sense of reality. In a recent visit to Washington State University, Frank Capra talked with Professor Humphrey Lindsay of the Cinema Department about his experiences during the war years.
The genesis of this originated in the mind of General Marshall, General George C. Marshall. He was the chief of staff. And we were in the war. We had no troops. We had nothing yet, but we were at war. And he had sent some lectures around to try to lecture to these new kids, 18-year-old hot rodders, we used to call them, that he couldn't, they weren't any more disciplined than you are today. Worse they were. And to think that these kids, with their long suits and their long chains and all their precocious things they were doing at the time, you could put them in uniform and discipline them, and then put them in battle, and then against trained military troops. This worried the general staff, and he wondered how we could put them into the minds of these young kids the necessity of why they were in uniform. Mm-hmm. That it wasn't just something they did just to play games. Mm-hmm. He tried to reach them with lectures. One lecture was better than another, and they couldn't reach another people. He thought of films. Then he thought of who can I get to make films about this thing that it was on his own. I mean,
mm-hmm. And so it was principally his idea.
Principally his idea. And he came in when I came into his office. He says we'll soon have 12 million kids in uniform, and many of them have never seen a gun, Now, what are they going to do? What are they going to do when they get this terrible disease of homesickness?
Mhm.
And he said, we'll have to give them some answers why they're in uniform. And he says, I think it could be done with film. It should be done with film. He says, we better have if we haven't got the answers, we haven't got a country.
Mhm.
So, this is the way it started. And I thought, when I got out of his office, I went into the nearest, can and sat down and said, Jesus Christ, what the hell am I don't know anything about.
Nothing about documentaries.
I've never made a documentary in my life. I don't know what a documentary looks like. I don't know anything about war. I don't know anything about anything. And why did he give me this job? But you know, you do what you can do. I remember going to the god of documentaries at the time was this Englishman. You remember him?
John Grierson?
John Grierson. And he happened to be in Washington, and somebody says, John Grierson knows everything about, he invented documentaries. I never saw a documentary. I never saw anybody that had made one. I thought documentaries were silly things that rich kooks made, you know. So,
I teach a course on documentaries. But go ahead.
anyhow, I finally got an audience with this Mr. Grierson, and he was very hard to get to. And I went to him with a hat in hand. I said, Mr. Grierson, I've been given a job to try to tell our troops why they're in uniform. How do you make a documentary? He looked at me and he says, and walked away.
Oh, goodness.
And I said, why, you son of a bitch, I'm going to show you how to make a documentary. And he got me mad. He got me so mad. I think that's what did the whole trick.
The 7 Why We Fight films were viewed by troops and civilians alike. One such film portrayed the gallant and victorious defense of Britain by the Royal Air Force. It's shown in a time when the shattered but unbeaten British were the only people fighting the Nazis. The film was called The Battle of Britain.
I thought of one thing. What the hell made me come into the Army? Why? What am I doing here? Well, I'm doing what? Because I believe these countries are going to try to take over the free countries and put into their own. But I didn't want to lose my freedom.
For 28 days, the Nazis were to drop everything in the book on the city of London. Tons upon tons of high explosives, delayed action bombs that exploded days later, torpedoes that sheared away whole buildings. And underneath the war in the air, the war of the man in the street went on.
So I thought, well, then if that's what impressed me, then perhaps if I make a series of films using nothing but their film. I did not have any studio. I had a telephone and a desk. I couldn't order 1,000 people around. So I said, well, we'll just take their films and show them to our kids and let them see who they're fighting and what they're talking about and what their aims are. And then, brother, they photographed themselves. Those guys that strutted around the world, they had cameras following them every place, and we had all kinds of film of these people saying what they were going to do. For some 20 or 25 years, the Germans and the Japanese and the Italians had been sending newsreels to their own little bunch of ethnic group.
Their own consulates.
To the Germans in New York, to the Japs in San Francisco, to the Italians in Chicago and all that. Mm-hmm. And these films, we found them in warehouses. And there was an enormous cache of 25 years of newsreels, their newsreels. And there was their whole story from beginning to end.
Britain was refusing to crumple up.
Across the channel, the enraged Goering took personal command of the operation. And on September 15th, he sent the Luftwaffe into one of its greatest attacks.
I got about 40 Hollywood people to help me, top Hollywood people. They came in droves, anything you wanted. And in that war, everybody wanted to get into it. It wasn't a war that anybody wanted to miss. We had all kinds of people. We had the top people. We had the John Fords, and all kinds of people working. And I had about 40 people from Hollywood, and we took over a small studio in Hollywood, and we made these films. Never having made a documentary, I didn't know that a documentary had to be dull. I said, well, here's 10 years, here's the stage. Here are the greatest heroes and the greatest villains that the world has ever produced, walking across the stage of the world. That's all you have to tell the story, dramatize these events.
An historic three-dimensional battle took place inside an area 60 miles long, 38 broad, and from 5 to 6 miles high.
The Battle of Britain was very effective because we knew the Britons, and we already cared for the Britons. They were our own friends, and when we saw them suffer, we suffered more than let's say than the Chinese or than the French, for instance. The Battle of Britain was, and then the Battle of Britain was more photogenic. It was in the air. It was attacks from the air, bombs, bombed out cities, burning cities. So it was really probably the most popular. Our chief fan of these films was Mr. Churchill. He called me into his office, 10 Downing Street, and he says, I want to tell you that these are the best films, and I want to make it. I want to show them to all the British public, and I want to make it a little something to introduce them with. I said, oh my goodness. He says, have you got equipment? I said, oh, don't worry, I'll get the equipment. And he gave a 4-minute speech before these things and called them the best example, the best statement of our case. He was just entranced with these films and the shock that they had and the way they were presented. He was really our biggest fan.
Ducky, where are you? Blimey, I thought they'd got you. Who, me? Nah, I had my fingers crossed.
They were made for the troops. They were made as training films. They had to be seen by every person in uniform. Had to see them. And then Army, Navy, Marines, and everything else. They were accepted as training films by the Canadians, the Australians, and the British. After the war was over, and we were in these so-called captured countries, and there were no theaters. There was nothing. The war was just over, and everything had gone to hell. They had no films, but they had the Why We Fight films in the embassies. So they said, well, I wonder if they want to see these films and tell them what the hell we think of them, you know. So they played the Why We Fight films in these various countries, and they rushed in to see these things. It cost them 10 cents each. And here they are, Germans, watching what we think of them, and the Japanese watching what we, and they went there, and the State Department told me that they took in $2.5 million.
Fleet Street, the center of the news. St. Paul's Cathedral. bombs blasting the historic past out of the lives of Englishmen. But in these 28 days, the Nazis lost 900 planes and their crews. The more they sent over, the more were shot down. The British Spitfire had proved to be one of the deadliest weapons ever put in the hands of man. If this kept up, pretty soon no more Luftwaffe.
The frantic Nazis had to pull a new one.
I would say that we went at it just about as we would making a large scope film that covered the history of that time. We dramatized it just as we would a script. We used our dramatic form of narrative. I did not use the form of voice of God narrating over this stuff. I used various voices at times, just to break in, but mostly I used voices that actually existed. Voices of the Germans, the French, this thing. So it was almost like a play. It wasn't written in play form, but I used as much as dialogue as possible. Dialogue. Hitler talking to this man, that answering this all kind of dialogue. So it was, in a sense, a very, very play on a very, very large scale, which is the scale of the world. And I say, with the villains and the heroes that such have never appeared at one time together, and so much at stake. Countries at stake, people at stake, whole countries at stake. So that's the way I saw it. I saw that the world was at stake.
The RAF wasn't much help at night. This was just German bombs against British guts.
Before leaving the Signal Corps, Capra received the Distinguished Service Medal from General Marshall.
After you've been away, I was away almost 6 years from camera. Jimmy Stewart was away 6 years. We came back to Hollywood, and we didn't know anybody. People introduced me to somebody, and they'd say, "Frank who?" and we were it's a new world. It was a brand new world. Everybody that during the war, no matter what picture you made money with it, because the theaters were filled, constantly filled. One theater manager that I talked to, he says, "He's angry with them what pictures we played. No matter what we played, all we did is go there in the morning at 8 o'clock and open the doors and duck." And they came in, he says.
On April 10th, 1945, Liberty Films Incorporated was born. The idea for Liberty had developed in the Army just a few short months before Capra's discharge. The men in charge, William Wyler, Frank Capra, Samuel Briskin, and George Stevens. Liberty Films made a post-war deal with RKO to make 9 pictures involving production costs in excess of $15 million. After looking at many different scripts, Capra settled on a story that had been written on a Christmas card that was entitled The Greatest Gift. Albert Hackle and Francis Goodrich were hired to rewrite the story and called it It's a Wonderful Life.
Jimmy Stewart was signed for the lead. Capra wanted to have his film tell the weary, the disillusioned, the disheartened that no man is a failure, and it did just that. His next film was State of the Union, which MGM agreed to take on.
Originally, Spencer Tracy and Claudette
Colbert had been signed for the leads, but Colbert was soon replaced before shooting even began, and Katharine Hepburn took over the role. When the film was released, Variety's review called it the most important film of 1949, if importance lies in influencing people and events. Paramount Studios bought Liberty Films in 1947. Working for Paramount, Capra came up with 3 films which he felt would be blockbusters, but when Capra refused to keep the budget under $1.5 million, Paramount refused to let him do the pictures. One of those pictures was A Woman of Distinction, which Capra traded with Harry Cohen for the remake rights to Broadway billing. Later retitled Riding High, Capra promised Paramount that he would make the film for under $1.5 million. He signed horse lover Bing Crosby and an unknown at the time, Colleen Gray. The show, to the surprise of everyone, managed to come in ahead of schedule and under budget. Time called it the most shrewdly effective show ever put together about horse racing. Capra's last show to be done for Paramount was Here Comes the Groom, starring Bing Crosby and Jane Wyman. After leaving Paramount, Capra was asked to become involved with Project Vista and was soon on his way to India to take a look at some problems that were coming up in the International Film Festival. He ended up spending 9 months there.
On his return to the United States, Capra was contacted by the president of AT&T about a new science show that Bell Telephone was contemplating. He ended up working for them for 5 years and produced 4 science films during that time. In 1958, Capra had a chance to get back into the movies again. Frank Sinatra had asked him to direct the film in which he was to star. It was called Hole in the Head. Frank Capra was awarded the D.W. Griffith Award for his outstanding contribution to the film director's art in February of 1959, and shortly thereafter he started to work on his last big show, Pocketful of Miracles. The film starred Glenn Ford and Bette Davis. Everywhere it was previewed, it was hailed as a great success, but when the show opened in the middle of December 1961, it turned out to be one of the biggest flops ever, and nobody could understand why. Capra produced his last film in 1964. It was a 20-minute short entitled Reaching the Stars. He tried one last time to direct a major motion picture, and after giving the show to another director, Frank Capra finally retired.
More of them are interested, more young people are interested than ever before. And so out of the great number that are interested, some will come up. And they come in at a time when there is no censorship. Anything goes. Mm-hmm. They come in at a time when they can work, they can say anything they want on the screen. Anything you want, you can say on the screen. This is a great time to say anything you want. My reason I've come around and talked to you guys, because I know some of you are going to make fake films, and I want to put into your heads that the world is not all evil, that not everybody goes around kicking each other in the teeth. Neither is the world all good, but it's not all evil. So, yes, we do have nightmares, but we also have dreams. We do have villainy, but we also have great compassion among ourselves. And the greatest of all emotions that move us is love. And without that bit of transcendental, sacrificial love, you generally don't make a hit. If you analyze all the great classics that have been in the plays, books, or anything, you'll find them all. I got one. They're about some kind of a sacrificial love. Could be a man and a dog. Could be about anything, but it's got to be something that makes the audience care for those people. And once you care for those people, if you want to see the people, you want to see the story I mean, the story that I'm talking about, you go see Rocky. You understand what I mean. Now, that's not what, that was made very cheaply. No stars, no big directors, no nothing in that. It was practically all amateurs. But they had a wonderful idea, and you sit there and you cheer like hell for that guy. But you don't cheer for these guys that go kicking each other in the teeth. The fact they disgust you. So I'm just want to tell you that people with idealists who fight down to their last cause, and you care about them, they're fighting for a cause of some kind, are very commercial ideas. Sentiment is not to be considered a sloppy kind of a thing that is, because there is all kinds of sentiment in the world. There's all kinds of sentiment in your own hearts right now. And you mustn't be afraid of sentiment. People love each other, and I'm just trying to show you that perhaps the films that I've made, I have used small guys in trouble who get out when they're by their own, something deep within them. That it can be done. That men count. Men and women count. Single men and women count. That the individual is the most important thing in life. The individual. The individual is the most. The individual has never before has anyone been born like you, and never again will anybody else be born exactly like you. So don't you see how that makes you unique? How important each one of you is. You're only one of you. And I imagine all through all the trees, the mountains, all the goats and everything else, one guy named Casey or something like that. And that's pretty close to the combination of nature and God. And you're important. And this is what, and I want you to see these films that I've made. There's one purpose, to show you that this kind of material is very saleable. People just love it. You don't have to go around with an axe. You don't have to go around shooting people's heads off and splattering their brains all over the wall. That's not necessary. Sure, killings happen, but I mean, you don't have to show violence just to try to be as more violent as you can. You try to sell violence itself. You don't have to show explicit sex. Sex has been going on a long, long time. And the greatest fun with sex is when it's not so explicit. The greatest fun of sex is the chase. There was it had happened one night, was one of the sexiest stories of our times. Today it wouldn't be considered sexy, but it was one of the sexiest stories of our times. And they never even held hands. But boy, was it up here. You see? And so this is what you don't have to make things with an axe or with a shovel and anything else. You use all this freedom that has been given to you to make films about the heart as well as about the vices. That's all I'm here for. I really trying to tell you that there's good in the world and that it's wonderful.